It's been exactly 6 months since iPhone 14 Pro came out last year in September 2022. Because I have been rocking my 13 mini, I haven't used this phone for that long, but jumping from an iPhone 13 model, it wasn't a major change or curve to get used to this 14 Pro, except a handful of differences, which I want to talk about in this video. This is an iPhone 14 Pro in space black finish. Even though Apple has been doing more or less the same design over the past 4 years now, you can't deny how beautiful this looks. And also the build quality is undeniable. This has a massive 6.1-inch display. I used to think 5.8 inches on my old iPhone XS was big, but now the standard Pro models are 6.1 and Pro Max is even bigger. The display is just amazing on this. Coming from a 60Hz display, it's hard to miss how great the 120Hz display is. And also it gets considerably bright. The camera module on the back is something that won't go unnoticed. The module and the lens has gotten bigger and bigger over the past Pro models, and this one is the biggest of all in all dimensions. If you plan to have a 14 Pro, putting a case on this is a no-brainer. No wonder why this got people talking. Initially, it was for the naming, but clearly it's more than that. This might be arguably the most interesting feature about the 14 Pro. This is a very interesting way to handle the camera and the sensors on the front of the iPhone. It's so much different from what all other competitors are doing, and it gets people talking and sometimes copying. The dynamic island gives you a unique experience compared to all the other previous iPhone Pro models. The way how they took hardware limitation and integrated seamlessly to this pill-shaped software feature is truly amazing. It acts more like a mini notification and status bar in one pill-shaped notch. It will give you notifications like music, maps, timers, and much more. The pill is slightly higher compared to the notch we had, but kudos to Apple to making this look so effortless. If you're upgrading to this iPhone for any reason, it should be the camera. The 14 Pro has a noticeably larger camera bump. That's primarily because of the larger 48 megapixel sensor for the main camera. Not only the megapixel had gone up from 12 to 48, but the sensor is also twice the size of the 13 Pros. If you know some things about camera and photography, you know it's not all about the megapixels. There's so many DSLRs and mirrorless full-frame cameras out there with a lower megapixel count. In fact, the full-frame camera I'm shooting right now only has 24.2 megapixels, so it's not the megapixel number but the sensor size that counts. If a camera has a larger sensor, it's generally capable of taking cleaner and better images in both day and night conditions, and you also get more depth of field. The tele lens on this iPhone has the 2x and 3x optical zooms as we have seen already, and the wide camera is also as good as before. By default, the main camera is taking 48 megapixels and binning them down to 12 megapixel. To get the full 48 megapixel, you need to go to camera settings and enable Pro RAW. Naturally, when you shoot in RAW, the image file sizes are huge. It can go up to 100 MBs, but it's worth it, especially if you take a lot of pictures for social media. You can simply drop them into an editing software like Lightroom and give it some touch, and it will look way better than any other smartphone pictures. The details are really good on the photos with the raw picture capabilities, and you have a lot of control over highlights and shadows. But one major downside of taking Pro RAW pictures is the shutter lag. It takes a few seconds to process each picture, making it much slower to take multiple shots at once. You can of course take 12 megapixel Pro RAW. I read this Pro RAW capture time difference is mainly because pixel binning is not done on a software level, but it's done on a hardware level by the ISP and the sensor. So instead of a 48 megapixel RAW image being downscaled to 12 megapixel, it's just 12 megapixel of RAW data being captured and saved. So when using 48 megapixel option, the amount of RAW data being captured is almost 4 times greater than the 12 megapixel option, hence the slow shutter speed. Depth of field is definitely noticeable on the pictures coming out of this. When you have a larger sensor, naturally the pictures will have a shallow depth of field. Some pictures look DSLRs or professional camera like. Pictures out of the main camera without the portrait mode looks very professional. It's simply the best camera they put in an iPhone. finally they brought this feature to an iPhone. However, it's not the best compared to all the other phones out there. It's a lot brighter than you want it to be. When it's on, it looks like the phone is never off. It shows the wallpaper and time, but it's a bit brighter than I would want it to be. There are times you would press the sleep button twice or more thinking the phone is not asleep. Speaking of display, the peak 200 nits brightness when outdoors is the key difference on this OLED display. I have seen people's reviews mentioning lower battery life, but like I said, I have not used this phone as much to find a noticeable difference. So even though the 14 Pro uses the A16 Bionic chip, the fact that the iPhone 14 and 14 Plus models that came out with this iPhone have the same A15 chips as last year's iPhone 13 models shows that this is much more of an incremental upgrade in performance. So if you're coming from an older iPhone, let's say iPhone 12 or lower, the 14 Pro will be a much more worthy upgrade.